You don't belong in this photo. Staff stays out of family portraits. Clara froze. She was only holding the bouquet a little girl had handed her. The bride turned away like Clara's presence was an eyesore. The photographer didn't say a word. What none of them knew was that Clara had quietly paid for the groom's entire college education. This wedding wouldn't exist without her. And yet today they cast her aside like she was nothing. Where are you watching from? Ever seen someone treated like they didn't matter only to realize they held everything together? What happened next left the entire wedding speechless. The evening was alive with the hum of celebration, the clink of glasses, and the soft glow of chandeliers casting golden light across the wedding reception. Laughter rippled through the room, a melody of joy woven into the chatter of friends and family. The bride, radiant in her gown, leaned toward her new husband, her eyes sparkling with the shared secret of their love. The groom stood glass in hand, his smile warm, but carrying a weight that no one yet noticed. The crowd hushed, expecting the usual speech gratitude, a few charming anecdotes, perhaps a toast to the future. But as he began, his voice steady and deliberate, he steered the moment towards something unexpected. "There's someone in my life," he said, pausing to let the words settle, "someone more important than anyone else who isn't sitting at the head table tonight." A ripple of curiosity passed through the guests. The bride's smile faltered, though she masked it with a nervous laugh, her fingers tightening around her glass. She leaned closer to him, expecting a sentimental nod to his late grandmother, a figure often mentioned in their late-night conversations. The room leaned in, anticipating a familiar story, but then he spoke a name clear and unflinching: Clara Jensen. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Every head turned searching until the spotlight of attention found her, a young woman standing quietly against the far wall, dressed not in the finery of a guest, but in the plain pressed uniform of a server. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her face a mixture of surprise and unease, as the weight of every gaze settled on her. The videographer, sensing the shift, swung the camera toward her, capturing the moment. Her eyes widened, her lips parting, as if to protest the sudden spotlight. Whispers stirred among the tables. Who was she? Why was she here in this moment meant for family and vows? The groom's voice softened, but it carried a conviction that silenced the murmurs. "Clara," he said, "is the reason I'm standing here today. Not just as a groom, but as the man I've become." The room faded for him, and in his mind, memories unfolded like pages of a book he'd carried for years. He saw Clara at dawn, her silhouette framed by the soft light of a kitchen window, stirring a pot of porridge with quiet care. It was for his grandmother, frail and fading, who Clara tended to with a patience that seemed to hold time itself at bay. He remembered the mornings when Clara, barely older than he was, would wake before the sun to ensure the old woman had something warm to eat, her hands moving with a tenderness that spoke of love, not bound by blood. Those were the days when his own world felt like it was unraveling. His mother gone, his father absent, the weight of grief and responsibility pressing down on a boy too young to carry it. He saw her again, walking beside him on a crisp autumn morning, her scarf fluttering as they headed toward the university entrance exam. He'd been a bundle of nerves, his future hanging on a single test, but Clara's steady presence had anchored him. She hadn't said much, just walked with him, her quiet confidence, a reminder that he wasn't alone. When he passed, when the letter arrived with his acceptance, she'd been there too, smiling softly as if she'd known all along he could do it. But she never took credit, never lingered in the spotlight of his victories. The memories shifted, layering one atop another. Clara cleaning their small, cluttered house after his mother's death, her hands scrubbing floors his family could no longer afford to maintain. She'd done it without being asked, without expectation of thanks, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to step into the gaps left by loss. He saw her slipping envelopes of cash money she'd earned from late-night shifts into his grandmother's drawer money that later paid for his textbooks, his tuition, the small necessities that kept him moving forward. She'd done it in secret, thinking no one noticed, but he had. He'd seen her sacrifices, her quiet acts of devotion, each one a thread, weaving the fabric of his survival. The guests were still now, their earlier levity replaced by a hushed reverence. The bride's smile had softened her earlier unease, giving way to something deeper, as if she were seeing her husband anew. The groom's voice trembled, not with nerves, but with the weight of truth. "Clara Jensen," he said, "is the foundation of everything I am. She gave me a chance when the world felt like it had turned its back. She gave me hope when I didn't know how to find it myself." He turned to face Clara directly, now his eyes locking with hers across the room. She stood frozen, her hands still clasped, her expression caught between disbelief and something softer, something that looked like recognition of a bond, unspoken but unbreakable. The guest followed his gaze, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the gravity of the moment. Tonight, he continued, this celebration almost happened without her. When I arrived, I overheard someone, a planner, a guest I don't know, saying she didn't belong in the photos. That she was just staff, just staff. His voice cracked on the words and he shook his head as if the idea were an affront to everything he held dear. Clara Jensen is not just anything. She is the reason I could dream of a night like this, of a life like this. She is family not by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. The room was silent now, the kind of silence that feels alive with meaning. Clara's eyes glistened, though she blinked quickly, as if trying to hold back the tide of emotion. The groom raised his glass, his hand steady now, his voice clear. To Clara, he said, who taught me that the people who change your life don't always sit at the head table. Sometimes they're the ones standing quietly in the shadows, giving everything so you can shine. The guests rose almost as one, their applause soft at first, then swelling into a wave of sound that filled the room. Clara stood still, her face flushed, her hands trembling slightly as she nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement that carried the weight of years. The bride reached for her husband's hand, her eyes bright with tears, and in that moment, it was clear she understood. This was not just a speech, not just a story, it was a reckoning, a moment of gratitude that reached beyond the surface of the evening's joy. As the applause faded, the groom stepped down from the podium and crossed the room. The crowd parted, watching as he approached Clara, who still stood against the wall. Her uniform a stark contrast to the elegance around her. He didn't hesitate, didn't care about the eyes on him. He pulled her into a hug, fierce and unyielding, and whispered something no one else could hear. She nodded, her hands gripping his shoulders, and for a moment they were not a groom and a server, but two people bound by a history that no one else could fully know. The music began again, the celebration resuming, but something had shifted. The room felt warmer, the connections between people more vivid, as if the groom's words had reminded everyone of the invisible threads that tie lives together. Clara slipped back into her role, moving quietly among the tables, but now the guests saw her differently. They saw not just a server, but a woman who had carried a boy through darkness, who had given without asking for anything in return. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the chandeliers, her name, Clara Jensen, became a story no one in that room would ever forget. The afternoon sun hung low over the lake, its golden light spilling across the sprawling lawn of the lakeside villa where the wedding party gathered for photographs. The air was warm, laced with the scent of blooming jasmine and the faint hum of cicadas. The bride stood at the center of the scene, her gown a cascade of ivory silk surrounded by bridesmaids in soft pastel dresses, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. The groom was nearby, adjusting his cufflinks, his smile easy but distracted, as if his thoughts were elsewhere. Clara Jensen moved quietly through the edges of this tableau, her pale blue uniform a stark contrast to the elegance around her. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, unadorned, practical, as if she had long ago decided that beauty was a luxury she couldn't afford. She carried a small bouquet of white roses handed to her moments earlier by a young bridesmaid who had mistaken her for someone meant to hold it. The child's voice had been bright, insistent. Here, take these, and Clara, ever obliging, had accepted without question. Now she stood at the edge of the group, uncertain, the flowers clutched loosely in her hands. The photographer was arranging the party, calling out directions with practiced ease, positioning family members and friends into a composition that would capture the day's joy. Clara hesitated, unsure whether to step forward or retreat, her presence an afterthought in the orchestrated chaos. Then came the voice, sharp and cutting, slicing through the warm afternoon. "What is she doing there?" One of the bridesmaids said, her tone dripping with disdain. She was tall, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Clara. "This is a family photo. The help needs to step back." The words landed like a slap, and the chatter around them stilled. Heads turned, eyes settling on Clara, who stood frozen, the bouquet trembling slightly in her grip. The bride, poised at the center of the frame, said nothing. Her gaze flicked toward Clara, brief and detached, her lips pressed into a thin line that carried neither warmth nor defense. The silence that followed was heavy, amplifying the sting of the bridesmaid's words. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she didn't argue. She lowered her eyes, her shoulders curving inward as she took a step back, then another retreating from the frame, as if she could make herself invisible. As she moved, the bouquet slipped from her hands, the roses tumbling to the grass with a soft thud. No one moved to pick them up. The wind stirred, catching the loose strands of Clara's hair, tugging them free from her braid, as if to expose the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. The photographer's camera clicked, capturing the posed smiles of the wedding party, the lake shimmering in the background, the moment preserved in crisp detail. But one of the assistant photographers, a young man with a quiet intensity, lingered on Clara. He adjusted his lens, framing her alone at the edge of the scene, her head bowed, the fallen flowers at her feet. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of pain, restrained but unmistakable, that haunted him. He kept the shot, though he wasn't sure why, tucking it away like a secret he wasn't meant to witness. Clara bent to retrieve the flowers, her movements deliberate, as if she could reclaim her composure along with the scattered blooms. The wedding party resumed its rhythm, the bridesmaid's comment already fading into the background noise of the day. The photographer called for a new pose, and the group shifted their laughter, returning as if nothing had happened. Clara straightened, clutching the roses to her chest, and moved further to the side, her role as an outsider reaffirmed. She was used to this, she told herself. She had always been the one in the margins, the one who cleaned up after others, who carried their burdens without being seen. But the weight of the moment lingered, a quiet ache that settled in her chest. A small figure approached her, then a girl no older than 7, one of the flower girls, her dress a puff of tulle, and her curls bouncing as she skipped across the grass. She stopped in front of Clara, tilting her head, her wide eyes studying the woman in the uniform. "Why does everyone yell at you?" the girl asked, her voice soft but piercing in its innocence. "Are you sad?" Clara's breath caught, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. The child's question was a mirror reflecting the truth she rarely allowed herself to face. She knelt to the girl's level, her hands still holding the roses, their petals bruised from the fall. A smile curved her lips, gentle, and practiced the kind of smile that had carried her through years of being overlooked. "I'm okay, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "I'm here to make sure everyone else has a happy day. That's my job. I don't need to be remembered for it." The girl frowned as if the answer didn't quite satisfy her, but she nodded, reaching out to touch one of the roses in Clara's hands. "You're nice," she said simply, then turned and ran back to the group, her tulle dress catching the light as she went. Clara watched her go, the smile lingering on her face, though her eyes held a depth of emotion no one else noticed. She stood brushing a stray blade of grass from her uniform and resumed her work, moving silently among the guests, refilling water glasses, adjusting table settings, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. But the moment stayed with her, as did the assistant photographer's stolen shot. He would look at it later, long after the wedding was over, and feel a pang he couldn't name. There was something about Clara's expression in that frame, the way her eyes held a story of quiet endurance, of a heart that gave without expecting return. It was a portrait of someone who had learned to live in the spaces others overlooked, who carried the weight of their dismissals with a grace that bordered on sacred. The afternoon wore on, the sun dipping lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The wedding party moved through their poses, the lake reflecting their joy, the camera capturing moments that would be framed and cherished for years. Clara remained at the edges, her uniform a reminder of her place, her braid loosening in the breeze. She didn't belong in the photos, not in the way the others did. She was the one who made the day possible, the one who arrived early to set up, who stayed late to clean, who ensured every detail was perfect, so the bride and groom could shine. And yet, when the bridesmaid's words echoed in her mind, "The help needs to step back," they carried a truth that cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She thought of the boy she'd helped raise, the groom now standing tall and proud, his life a testament to the dreams she'd quietly nurtured. She hadn't done it for recognition, hadn't expected to be seen. But as she stood there, the roses still in her hands, the wind whispering across the lake, she allowed herself a moment of longing. Not for praise, but for a world where her presence might be enough, where she could stand in the light without being pushed back into the shadows. The photographs would be beautiful, she knew. They would capture love, laughter, the promise of a new beginning. But they wouldn't capture her, not the way she truly was, not the heart that beat beneath the uniform. And yet, as she looked out at the lake, its surface rippling under the weight of the setting sun, Clara felt a quiet resolve. She was here, and that was enough. For now, it had to be. The soft glow of twilight settled over the wedding reception, the lake outside reflecting the last traces of a fading sunset. Inside, the air was thick with emotion, the kind that lingers after a truth has been laid bare. The groom's speech had left the room hushed, the name Clara Jensen still echoing in the minds of the guests. As the applause faded, the weight of her story began to unfold, a tapestry of quiet devotion woven through years of hardship, sacrifice, and unspoken love. Clara had been more than a presence in the groom's life. She had been its cornerstone long before this day of vows and celebration. It began when he was just 13, a boy teetering on the edge of adolescence, his world fracturing under the weight of loss. His grandmother, the anchor of their family, had suffered a stroke, her once vibrant spirit confined to a frail body in a quiet room. His mother, already battling her own grief, slipped away soon after, leaving a void that no one knew how to fill. Into this broken home came Clara, a young woman barely out of her teens, hired to help with the household tasks that had become too much for a family in disarray. She was not a relative, not bound by blood or obligation, yet she stepped into their lives with a steadiness that felt like fate. Clara moved through their home like a quiet tide, washing away the chaos with her presence. She cooked meals that warmed more than just the body, her hands stirring pots of soup, with a care that spoke of something deeper than duty. She sat with the grandmother through long, silent afternoons, reading aloud, or simply holding her hand as if her touch could coax life back into weary bones. For the boy, awkward, angry, lost in his grief, she was a constant, a figure who never faltered, even when his own resentment lashed out at the world. She didn't flinch, didn't retreat. She stayed, and in staying, she became the scaffolding that held their fragile family together. The years brought more blows. The boy's father, once a man of ambition, crumbled under the weight of bankruptcy, his dreams dissolving into debt and despair. Illness followed, swift and unforgiving, claiming him as it had his wife. Friends and relatives drifted away, their condolences fading into silence, leaving the boy and his grandmother to face a future that felt impossibly bleak. But Clara remained. She was the one who swept the floors of a house they could barely afford to keep, who mended clothes worn thin by time, who ensured the boy had a lunch to take to school, even when the pantry was nearly bare. She was the one who never left. What no one knew, what Clara had kept hidden, even from the boy, was the extent of her sacrifice. At night, when the house was quiet, she worked extra shifts at a diner across town, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The money she earned, meager as it was, went not to her own dreams, but to the boy's future. When the time came for him to apply to university, it was Clara who slipped her savings into an envelope, paying the registration fees he didn't know his family couldn't afford. She did it in secret, her name absent from the transaction, her act buried beneath the weight of her humility. To her, it was enough that he had a chance that the bush she'd watched grow could reach for something beyond the shadows of his past. The grandmother saw it all, her eyes sharp despite her failing body. She loved Clara like a daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude for the young woman who had become their salvation. But the old woman's affection was tempered by the disapproval of her late daughter-in-law, who had viewed Clara as an outsider, a hired hand unworthy of family ties. The grandmother had kept her feelings quiet, honoring the tensions of a fractured household, but in her final days, she could no longer stay silent. On a night when the air was heavy with the scent of impending rain, she pressed a small savings book and a letter into Clara's hands. Her voice, weak but resolute, carried the weight of a truth too long unspoken. "You are the one who kept this family alive when everyone else walked away." She wrote, "You gave us your heart, your strength, your everything. If they forget you, Clara, they are forgetting themselves. You are ours, and we are yours always." Clara had wept when she read those words alone in the quiet of her room, the savings book untouched. She hadn't wanted the money, hadn't wanted recognition. She had stayed because it was right, because the boy and his grandmother were her family, even if the world didn't see it that way. The letter, though, she kept folded carefully in a drawer, its words a quiet balm for the moments when she felt invisible. Now, as the groom stood before the wedding guests, his voice still resonating with the revelation of Clara's role in his life, the truth of those years settled over the room. The bride, who had earlier cast a cold glance at Clara during the photographs, now sat with her hands clasped tightly, her face softened by a mix of regret and understanding. The bridesmaids, one of whom had so carelessly dismissed Clara as the help, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier confidence replaced by a quiet unease. The guests, too, felt the shift, their murmurs fading into a reverence for the woman who had stood in the shadows, giving everything so this day could exist. The groom stepped down from the podium, his eyes seeking Clara, who still lingered at the edge of the room, her uniform a stark reminder of her place in the eyes of others. But he saw her differently, and he would not let her fade into the background again. With a gesture that was both gentle and commanding, he crossed the room, the crowd parting to make way. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and unwavering, and spoke softly, though his words carried to every corner of the room. "Clara," he said, "you belong with us. You always have." He led her to the stage where the wedding party stood waiting, the photographer poised to capture the moment. The bride rose, her earlier reserve replaced by a tentative smile, and she stepped forward, taking Clara's other hand. The bridesmaids followed, their faces a mix of apology and awe, as if they were seeing Clara for the first time. The guests watched, some with tears in their eyes, as Clara was drawn into the heart of the photograph, no longer at the edges, but at the center where she had always belonged. The camera flashed, freezing the moment in time, a family not defined by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love. Clara stood there, her braids slightly loosened, her eyes bright with a mixture of disbelief and quiet joy. She was no longer just the maid, no longer the shadow in the frame. She was family, and in that moment, under the soft glow of the reception lights, her story became a part of theirs, etched into the memory of a day that would never forget her. As the music swelled and the celebration resumed, Clara felt the weight of the grandmother's letter in her heart, its words a blessing that had finally found its place. She was home, and she was seen not just by the boy she had helped raise, but by everyone who now understood the depth of her love. And in that understanding, the family she had saved became whole again, bound not by what they had lost, but by what they had found in her. In the glow of that wedding night, no one in the framed photographs paused to consider Clara Jensen, whose quiet sacrifices shaped their triumph. Unseen at the edges, she sought no praise. Her kindness, pure and nameless, guided her life. Yet that evening, as her story unfolded, the world paused, humbled by her selflessness. Kindness, she proved, needs no title, no spotlight. But when its truth emerges, even silent hearts earn a standing ovation. If her story stirs you, subscribe to Sir Alex Stories for more tales of quiet power, hidden grace, and poetic justice where unsung heroes find their light.